Excuse the echoey audio. I did try and use my lapel mic, but for some reason it wasn't working, so that's annoying. Currently in my kitchen right now. It's almost 1 in the morning, because I've been thinking about some stuff. And the main thing I've been thinking about, sort of life and how I'm living it, this doesn't have much to do with the fact that I'm going to be turning 30 this year. It has more to do with the fact of how I've chosen to spend the past 5 years of my life. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about these particular things because it's a long goddamn story. But the main thing to take away from this is a simple sort of analogy for people who feel like they've wasted a certain decade of their life. So there's the typical one of I've wasted my teens, I've wasted my 20s, I've wasted my life in some way. Wasting my life is something that has been running through my mind quite regularly for the past 5 years, and I've been desperately trying to fix that. The weird thing is, to me, try not to waste your life is the same as the pursuit of happiness. The more you pursue it, the further away you get from it. We don't crave the pursuit of happiness. That's not the thing that makes us happy. What makes us happy is the things that make humans happy. So, the basics of eat well, sleep well, exercise, socialize, the things that are sort of proven to be good for the human condition, the human experience, I should say. Even like meditation, allowing yourself to feel your ups and your downs, that sort of thing. It's a very complex thing, but you get the idea. The second we try to acknowledge our happiness, we sort of cease to be happy. Because, as I just said, we don't find happiness in acknowledging we're happy. That's not the thing that makes a person happy. Coming back to the idea of a waste of life, or wasting your 20s, or wasting your 30s, or wasting your teens, however you feel, it's the same thing. The more you chase it, the desire to not waste your life, the more you actually waste it. And that has been my experience these past 5 years. So I think there's actually a reason for why, well, I suppose there's a reason for everything really, isn't there? But there's a specific reason that I think will shed some light on this sort of phenomenon, of why we seem to think we need to use our time wisely, which, well, we do, I suppose, but it's in the context of like being like, I don't want to waste my life, I must be happy and stuff like that. So let me tell you a little story. It's very short, so bear with me. When I was in my late teens, so 19, I was almost 20, I was very good friends with this guy who was a year older than me, and when he turned 20, he had a bit of a mini crisis. And it's very silly for a 20-year-old to have a life crisis, thinking that their life is almost over, and they've barely done anything with it. It's like, mate, you've barely been alive, calm down, okay? You're still practically a child, shut up. Because he sort of felt like he wasn't living his life to the fullest and doing big things like other people were doing, he sort of felt like he was wasting his life. He felt like he wasn't living up to his expectations of life. Expectations is a very interesting concept to play with that I might look into more in future if I make another video, if I think about this. But back onto the topic. At the time, me and him were very much into heavy metal music. I think if I'm remembering this correctly, he felt like because one of the biggest metal bands in the world, so Metallica, I'm sure people have heard of Metallica, when those guys were in their late teens, early 20s, so the same age we were at this time of the story, they made the first Metallica album called Kill 'Em All. It is one of the first thrash metal albums. It was sort of a groundbreaking album. It was a hell of a thing to do at that age, and obviously it kickstarted their career. And now obviously they're one of the biggest metal bands to be around. Even people who are not into metal have probably heard of Metallica, and that says it all. So to him, he felt like because he wasn't making groundbreaking albums at 19 or 20, then he wasn't living enough. It relates to the concept, wasting your life in your 20s, wasting your teens. It relates to the concept of comparison. And comparison is the thief of joy, I think Theodore Roosevelt said, it's looking at other people's lives and going, well, I should be doing that. Well, no, you shouldn't. It's not a matter of should, because Should's an interesting word. We always say we should and we shouldn't, or we should this, or we shouldn't do that. And the concept of comparison is a very interesting thing because it does steal us of our joy, but at the same time, comparison is something that we actually developed evolutionarily. It's an evolutionary trait that we developed because I think something along the lines of, if you were a farmer back when we were just starting to become farmers, and your neighbouring farm was absolutely killing it at growing crops and you were doing a dog shit job, you'd want to look at them and go, how are they doing? I'm going to do it like them. And then you would grow crops better because you asked for their advice and you looked at their results and you grew crops better this time around. It is an evolutionary trait, which is very interesting because it makes it sort of sound like if comparison is a thief of joy and we are programmed to compare, then we are programmed to not be happy. I think that's a very funny concept, but also equally kind of scary. I find it more funny because it's so silly that it makes some sense to me, but maybe it's dumb to people who study psychology. I don't bloody know. Comparison is a very silly thing, and it's always one of the things when I've looked over like articles over the past 5 years about like improving your life, improving your self-esteem, improving your self-worth and what have you. It's always been stop comparing yourself to other people. And I can see why. I've seen it enough in myself, in my own thoughts, when I'm out and about in the world, comparing myself to other people, even judging them in my head as a means to avoid my own insecurities. That it does rob you of your joy. It does rob you of your sort of enjoyment of just being out in the world, breathing some fucking fresh air, touching some goddamn grass. If you're my age, I'm 29 now, if you're 19, if you're 15, I mean, even then, there was a mate of mine, his ex now, when they were together, I remember she was like 22, and she said that her life's over. You said, you're 22, you've just started. Okay, she had done some pretty like cool things, not groundbreaking stuff, but some pretty good things. Not that I'm trying to like undermine her achievements, but she has done some nice things. But that doesn't mean your life's over just because you feel like you've peaked. You know what I mean? At 22. Maybe some people do, but it doesn't matter. You're still young. You still have plenty of time, plenty of opportunities. At the end of the day, if you're 15, if you're 20, if you're 25, if you're 30, whatever, if you're my age, then, and you feel like you have been wasting your life so far, if you feel like you might worry that you're going to waste the following decade, or you have wasted the previous one, just know that you haven't. There was an interesting quote I saw a while ago. I can't remember what it is exactly, and I do not have a very good memory, but I remember the message. It was something along the lines of, there are some people who absolutely are killing it at life very early on, in their teens, in their 20s. And there are people who struggle and don't start living until they're after 30. And that's because they spend most of their life surviving. Because they had a rough start. They maybe had a very hostile home life when they were children, so it has come with an abundance of trauma that they still have to, unfortunately, deal with well into their 20s. That's one of the reasons why I sometimes hear people say, your 30s are better than your 20s. Because maybe the people who have said that to me have had to process a lot of their childhood trauma throughout their 20s and get over that stuff. And by their 30s, they're mostly free of it, to the point where they can start living their lives. Moth. I do feel to some degree I've wasted the past 5 years of my life, but at the same time I try to look back on it and go, actually there's a lot of good things that came from it too, even if I was going down the wrong path that ultimately damaged my mental health. But I'm glad I noticed that early on enough that I didn't just carry on doing these same things well into my 30s. I noticed pretty quickly that my mental health was declining, and I've gotten a lot better since. But I'm still on an uphill climb. And if you're 29 and you're still on an uphill climb, fine. This is the path that you are on. These are the cards you've been dealt, and there's nothing for you to do other than just to fucking play them. It sucks. Yeah, I'm not taking that away from you. But unfortunately, it's what you got. Do with the information I've said today what you will, and I hope it has been in some way helpful. Don't compare yourself. Don't think you've wasted the past 10 years, or you think you're going to waste the following 10. You're not. I suppose if you just watched paint dry for 10 years, maybe you would.